Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 327. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about mountains and skiing and random celebrity sightings as we go to Sun Valley, Idaho.
Cathedral, got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Before we get into this week's episode, I do have three news stories for you. Ryanair, as you may know, is a discount airline in Europe. They are famous for cheap flights, but also sometimes for making things a little more complicated for their passengers. One of the things they do is they charge more if you check in with a person, so they will sometimes require that you check in online. It turns out, even when the online site is down, recently they were not giving people their money back. And that fee is 60 British pounds per passenger, which is quite a bit. If you're traveling with kids this summer and you're traveling in United Airlines, one thing to be aware of is that they have changed their policy that families traveling with small children are no longer going to be boarded early. United had way too many different boarding groups, and they've simplified the process, and this is one of the things that fell out of that. And so look at the number on your boarding card. That's the group you'll be boarding with. One good news story this week, or an interesting story. You may remember an earthquake hit Christchurch, New Zealand, and it destroyed their famous cathedral there in Christchurch. They are rebuilding the cathedral out of cardboard. Now, the cardboard certainly should be more earthquake-proof, but I'm not sure it's going to be rain-proof. I suspect this is a temporary addition. They're rebuilding a cathedral that will seat 250 people out of cardboard tubes. For links to all three of those stories, check out the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. I'd like to welcome to the show Scott Jordan, who's come to talk to us about Idaho. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chris. Good to be here.
And I say Scott Jordan of Scottevest. Not sure that everybody knows what that is. We'll talk about Scottevest a little while later in the show. But you are located in Idaho and have been there for some time, as I understand.
That's right. I moved here about 8 years ago, and I'm in Sun Valley, Idaho.
And Sun Valley is a region that has gotten a lot of tourism through the years, although I don't know that it's gotten as much attention now as it did, say, when the Winter Olympics were there oh so many years ago. But why should someone go to Sun Valley, Idaho?
Well, the Winter Olympics were never held here, by the way.
I'm sorry.
That was in Salt Lake City or Squaw and surrounding areas. So,
I was talking about in the 1950s or so. I thought they had the Winter Olympics.
That's news to me. I don't think so. But there's all sorts of other reasons to come to Sun Valley aside from the Winter Olympics. It's a fantastic ski resort. And that was the original reason why I came here. I was a skier, and I was told that Sun Valley is the mother of all ski resorts here in North America. And in fact, it was the first destination ski resort in all of North America. And I came here to ski and fell in love with it and moved here 8 years ago, about 2 years after my first visit.
Now, you talk about it as a ski destination, so it's a place that we should only go in the wintertime, or I'm gathering that there are things to do year-round.
Actually, there are more things to do in the summertime than there are in the wintertime. And they have an expression here: you move here for the skiing and the winter, but you stay here for the summers. The summers are short, but they are absolutely spectacular. And I didn't realize that until I came here. I moved here because I was a skier and thought it was great. And the summers, it's perfect weather. There's no humidity. There's hiking, biking, arts of all sorts, symphony, free out, the largest outdoor, longest running symphony that's free, and all sorts of concerts and outdoor festivals, fishing, fly fishing. Whereas in the wintertime, the skiing's spectacular, but if you're not a skier or not an outdoor snow person, snowshoer or skate skier, it's probably not the place for you to come in the wintertime.
Well, let's put Sun Valley on the map, first of all. Where are we in Idaho?
Idaho is like a kind of a boot, if you will, I guess. And we're in the center to the east. We're about 120 miles east of Boise, and you fly directly into Sun Valley. Actually, the airport is SUN, and it's in Haley, Idaho, which is about 15 minutes away. It's a small airport that does not allow jets to fly in. So you have to connect through Salt Lake City or Seattle if you're flying directly into Sun Valley. A lot of people fly into Boise, and it's a really beautiful, a little over 2-hour drive to get here from Boise.
And for someone to come, first of all, when would you recommend? We've talked about winter season and we talked about summer. So let's divide that as sort of two different trips and do them separately. If I'm coming in winter, is there a particular time I should come?
Yeah, I think February or March are the best times to come in the wintertime. Sun Valley has incredible snowmaking capacity, whereas this last winter, a lot of the ski resorts really didn't open until mid-January. Sun Valley, almost every single run, they can make snow if they need to. So it's not a matter of whether the mountain's going to have sufficient coverage, but it tends to be awfully cold in January. And it'll get a little warmer, and they call it Sun Valley for a reason. It's always sunny here, and so it seems. And so, I think February would be the best time, or March the best time to come for the winter time. And the summer, the season really starts to get rolling end of June, beginning of July. And it's fantastic in terms of lots of things going on until the end of August, beginning of September. And then personally, I think the best values and the best times and the prettiest time is in October, end of September, October. The fall leaves that are changing in the mountains, I mean, it's really spectacularly gorgeous here. And a lot of people don't come here. And as a result, during that time, there's some really great deals at hotels and restaurants. And there aren't that many crowds, if there are crowds here at all. One thing about Sun Valley, it is a little hard to get to, having sort of a small regional airport and having to fly through Salt Lake. And as a result, a lot of people don't know about it. And therefore, it's not terribly crowded, but it is what I like to refer to as the original Aspen. Aspen's got all the glitz and the celebrities and all the things that go along with Aspen, and homes built up all along every hillside. And Sun Valley has all the same things that Aspen does without the attitude that you get there. I can walk down the street and bump into Clint Eastwood and Arnold Schwarzenegger and Demi Moore and Bruce Willis, just to name a few, and they just fit in, as regular folks along with everyone else. And it's a really just a really amazing community. Never lock your door. Keys are in every car, unlocked. It's kind of like living in Mayberry to some degree, and visiting it as well. Sun Valley was established in the late 1930s, and Averill Harriman owned the railroad, and he was trying to figure out a way to sell railroad tickets, and he sent this guy from Austria out to all the now ski towns, Aspen, Vail, Telluride, then mining towns, to find the perfect ski mountain that mirrored the ski mountains in Austria. When he came to Sun Valley, he knew that this was exactly where he was going to build the resort. And the resort, the Sun Valley Lodge, there's really just one major hotel here, and it's the Lodge. And it looks identical to the way it looked in 1938. And it just obviously updated in LCD TVs, and it's been kept up very, very well. But you really feel like you're walking through history when you come here, and that's part of the allure.
And if we're there in the wintertime and we've done our skiing on the mountain, what other things would you recommend people try?
Well, there's all sorts of après-ski activities that involve drinking and eating and socializing. And there's art gallery walks that they have, I think, every Thursday night. And there's a snowshoeing and skate skiing. It has one of the best Nordic centers in the world, with hundreds of miles of skate skiing paths that are perfectly groomed. They have horse-drawn carriages that take you on a sleigh ride to Trail Creek Cabin. It's a very touristy thing to do, and they give you blankets to put over your legs. And there's world-class ice shows that are right there at the lodge. I mean, the skaters there are just literally in the Olympics, and would then come to Sun Valley to perform. So you'll not run out of amazing things to do here. Hot tubbing. There is a natural hot spring that most people, you won't find it in a guidebook, but it's driving down Board Ranch off to the other side of the mountain, about 10 miles down, and you just sit in the middle of nature enjoying a natural hot spring, and just incredible things to do here.
Okay. And now I'm going to ask you to a little more specific. So you mentioned food options, for instance. Where would you recommend?
My favorite restaurant is Globus, and it's an Asian fusion restaurant. It's been around for years, and the owner is named Wendy, and they take amazing care of you. There are lots of fantastic restaurants here, a lot of new trendy restaurants. They come for a while and they're popular. This one I am certain that when this podcast airs and someone listens to it in 10 years, Globus will still be there. And it will be great. Everyone has to go to the Pioneer. It's the old sort of saloon that's on Main Street that you can sort of imagine how it must have been like in the late 1800s when this was a mining town. You don't have to imagine, because it's probably very similar when they have actually pictures of people tying their horses up right in front of this bar on Main Street called the Pioneer. And I would suggest you order the beef ribs there if you can. They only make a very small amount, and the moment you walk in, you have to ask specifically, do you have beef ribs, before you sit at the table, and put your name on them. It's odd, but it's worth it.
And you mentioned this being kind of a little bit of a flashback to Mayberry, although my understanding is actually that they do lock their cars in Mayberry these days, because if you don't, your neighbor will put zucchini in it, is my understanding. But what's going to surprise me when I go to Sun Valley in the wintertime? Let's just stick to the wintertime right now.
I think what will surprise you and all your travelers is just how warm it can be here when it's under 30 degrees. Because it's so dry and because it's always sunny, I'm often walking around without a jacket in January and February and March for sure. Sometimes, with short sleeves on. It's 30 degrees and there's no humidity whatsoever because it's a mountain desert climate. Mm-hmm. And it just defies logic how you see 2 feet of snow, more than that in some places on the ground, and yet you're walking around without a jacket on.
And we put it in the middle of Idaho. We didn't mention that it's in the middle of the Rocky Mountains, which
That's
is
right.
Why we have mountains enough for skiing there. What is the elevation?
5,900.
Okay.
at the base of the mountain. I think 9,400 at the top. And another thing about the ski mountain, a lot of ski mountains have a lot of parts where it's a little steep and then it flattens out, and it's a little steep and it flattens out. This is consistent from the top to the bottom. It's a consistent steep run, but not like triple black diamond steep. It's a great run from top to bottom. There's no boring parts of it. And there is not a single line. I don't care what holiday it is. There's no lift lines here whatsoever. They just don't exist. If you're seventh in line, you're impatient. They just don't have lift lines.
So you moved there 8 years ago. Before you moved there, who did you run into? What local did you meet? And you thought, I could live here with people like this here.
That's a good question. Oddly, the local comedian, his name is Mike Murphy, and he goes by the title The Funny Guy. When we came here, he went to this comedy show, and I really felt like I was walking back into 1970, where it was a comedy show, and we had just an amazing time back in time and laughed very much. A really enjoyable experience. And at the end of the show, he said, and by the way, I'm also a local real estate broker here. So you're interested in real estate, look me up. I'm the funny guy. We said, well, maybe we'll look for some real estate here. We don't know any brokers here. So, we looked them up. We thought we'd have an amazing, funny experience while we're looking at real estate. This guy was hilarious on stage. Well, he was the most down-to-earth, unfunny guy when it came to driving around looking at real estate with him. And to this day, he's become one of my very best friends. And he told us about what the community was like, not just as a tourist, but what it would be like as a community. And I think that's what we've really appreciated in both visiting here. You walk down the street and everyone says hello to you. And now it's become such a habit that when I go to New York or Las Vegas on business, I'm walking down the street and I'm just saying hi to people and they're looking at me like I'm crazy. But you go to the post office and you say hi to people in the post office. They don't deliver mail to your home here. You have to go to the post office. A lot of Western towns are that way. So I just think that just the whole sense of there's 5,000 people in the community, 3,500 in the town of Ketchum, where the ski mountain is actually physically in Ketchum, and Sun Valley is the resort. But they're adjacent towns and almost synonymous. But when they're the tourist season, that number swells exponentially. But it's like everyone knows your name, like the song goes in Cheers,
Best day of the year to be in Sun Valley, Idaho?
July 4th.
Okay. Small town 4th of July parade sort of thing?
Perfect weather. You get a long weekend, lots of activities going on. Never rains, on July 4. I mean, it barely rains here at all, except what they call the slack seasons. I would not recommend anyone come in May or early June, or I guess early November, in November at all. Those are tough times to come here, but July 4th, best day of the year by far.
Okay. And when I come there July 4th, what am I going to be doing?
So you're here July 4th. You participate in all the parades and all the activities and barbecues and outdoor concerts and summer symphony and the fly fishing that Ernest Hemingway moved here. He chose to make his home here. You'll go for a ride up to Stanley, Idaho. It's one of the most beautiful rides you'll ever take in your life, along a meandering river right alongside of you for the better part of it. None of the houses have air conditioning here for the most part, which is hard to believe. I come from Chicago, and you need to have air conditioning. It's like running from a car that's air conditioned to a house that's air conditioned to a mall that's air conditioned. Here, every day is, even if it's 90 degrees, I know they say this in Phoenix, it's 120, but it's a dry heat. It's truly, if it's 90 at its hottest, you don't feel it. And the moment you step in the shade, you're perfectly cool. So, and they call it Sun Valley for a reason. It really stays light here on the longest day to close to 10 o'clock.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're pretty far north there.
Yeah.
So summertime, I'm coming to Sun Valley. You mentioned hikes. I'm hiking where?
Anywhere. I mean, everywhere you turn, there's a trailhead. Our favorite place and the one that's closest to town is one that's called Adams Gulch. It's right off the main highway. And when we first went on that hike, It seemed like it was 20 miles long, and every time you turn, there was another beautiful sight. As it turns out, it's a good 3 mile at its shortest, and as long as 8 miles at the longest. And there are all sorts of different trails that go around. As I already mentioned, there's a hike to Pioneer Cabin, which is a solid hike, and that's where Ernest Hemingway did a lot of his writing. And you can actually be in the cabin that Ernest Hemingway wrote, and there are lots of journals, a lot of other writers. Fantastic hike. That's a good, I guess, 12-mile round trip hike. I'd have to look at the hiking book. Also, if you're a mountain biker, there's epic mountain biking to be had at Mount Baldy. I mean, right outside my back door is where the ski mountain is. And when I said anywhere, I know it's too generic for your listeners to appreciate it. But in my mind, when we decide to go for a hike after work or when we came to move here, it's just there are that many hikes. And dogs, if you love dogs are everywhere here, and they're allowed to be off leash. They're very friendly. And during the summertime, you go hike up Mount Baldy, or you can take the chairlift up. They run the chairlift, and you can bike down. They rent bikes. The ski lodges are spectacular. You almost feel uncomfortable walking in them in your ski boots because they're marble and brass, and the food is just amazing.
Side trips, especially in the summertime now, from Sun Valley.
Stanley, which is a town.
You mentioned the drive to Stanley. Is there something that we're going to see in Stanley, or is it really just the drive along the way that's the attraction?
It's the drive, but the rivers along the way. Redfish Lake. There's an absolutely gorgeous lake up by Stanley. It's a small mountain lake, fairly small by lake standards. Lots of hiking, boating, and just what you could imagine in terms of activities that would go along, and games and kids and hikes and biking all around, and very wholesome fun. I mean, it's just like what goes on there now is exactly the way you could envision it 40 years ago. Kids having fun, listening to music and playing games and swimming and boating, and it's unbelievable in terms of it's just authentic good times. Copper Basin, it's another area, the other side of town. It's just, again, a place to camp. There's so many campsites around here that oftentimes I will camp during the middle of the week. I'll leave work and I'll go to a campsite. I will be 15 minutes away from my office and my home, and I'll feel like there's not a person to be seen for miles. And then I'll come into work the next morning. The Bruno Sand Dunes, it's a couple hours away. Maybe 3 hours away, these massive sand dunes. That's spelled Bruneau. And I think they're like 600 feet high of just these natural sand dunes that kind of take their own shape, and it's awfully windy. I've got some spectacular pictures of the Bruno sand dunes that I will email you.
Now, is that down by Craters of the Moon, or?
It's actually the other direction.
Okay.
And Craters of the Moon is this area that looks just like what it says. It's black lava, and it looks like you're on the moon. It's otherworldly. I'm not sure that's worth a day trip. I mean, if you're a photographer, which I imagine a lot of your listeners are, I mean, it's really unique terrain, and we've often thought about doing a photo shoot out there. I think that would be a lot of fun for my company, but not necessarily worth the day trip, in my opinion.
Well, let's expand this just for a moment. If you had to pick your prettiest spot in all of Idaho, now we've gone, to long day trips at that point, where would it be?
Trail Creek Cabin, which has a view of the Bald Mountain and the whole valley.
Okay, I gave you the whole state. You went 3 miles, right? You are in the prettiest spot in all of Idaho.
I hear Coeur d'Alene is gorgeous. I've never been there. Mm-hmm. I think it's Sandpoint, which is, there's another resort way up north, but that's like 14 hours away.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
sure, yeah.
Snake River, there's some gorgeous areas in the Snake River. You cross the Snake River when you're going to Twin Falls, and sometimes you'll fly out of Twin Falls, and that's where Evel Knievel made one of his famous jumps.
Right, over the canyon there. Mm-hmm. Yes, I am that old, yeah.
As am I. But, I mean, Sun Valley is really uniquely beautiful. I'm a little subjective here on that. But
one thing you gave up by moving to Sun Valley?
The ability to travel readily.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
I mean, I hadn't really thought that through. It's a double-edged sword because if it was easy to get here, there would be a lot more tourists and it would be much less authentic. I mean, Jackson Hole is a beautiful place, but jets coming in, and they've got the big national parks there, Yellowstone, and they get an influx of hundreds of thousands of, if not millions of people, because this town is small and hard to get to. You don't get that many people coming in, which conversely means that if you want to leave and you want to go away and travel, which I'd like to do, it is a pain in the butt, to be honest with you. If there's a cloud ceiling, they won't fly out. You have to bus to Twin
Falls,
which is about an hour, 15 minutes away, and from there you fly to Salt Lake. But it makes up for it once you're here. It really does. I would recommend that anyone planning a trip here, it's not a long weekend. It's because of the travel. I think you have to stay at least 4 days to make it worthwhile. 5 or 6, you'll have plenty to do. And you'd be surprised. It's not terribly expensive once you're here. The accommodations are plentiful. If you can, stay at the Sun Valley Lodge. That is the historic lodge. Although there are other places you can stay, that is where you should stay. You will not regret it.
Excellent. I've got 4 more questions for you as we wind this down. The day that you knew you were a real resident of Sun Valley?
When I stopped saying things like, what kind of weather do you think they'll get? When I stopped referring to the town as they and you started using we. You think we'll get snow this weekend instead of you think they'll get snow this weekend. I don't know when that happened. My wife used to always correct me when it happened and say, who are they? It's we. We live here, so it wasn't a particular day. It probably was, but I don't recall what day it was. But when we moved here 8 years ago, it was an experiment. We didn't do it with a lot of thought. My lease was ending. My wife had just sold her business. I had started mine recently, and we thought to ourselves, if we don't try it now, we'll never try it. We thought we were going to go through that same cycle that most people do. It seems, not most people, but a lot of people, you buy a little condo wherever it is that you think you want to retire to, and you spend a week or 2 weeks there a year, and that 2 weeks turns into 3 weeks, and then it turns into twice a year, 3 times a year, and by the time you're 65 or 70, you find a way to spend a few months there. And we just flipped it around. We just said, that's ridiculous. Why wait till we're 65 or 70 to live where we want to retire? Let's live there now and visit, our home in Chicago, our family in Chicago. As it turns out, from the day we left, we've been to Chicago collectively in 8 years 3 times, 2 of which was on business by me, and much to the dismay of my loving mother-in-law.
One thing that makes you laugh and say only in Sun Valley?
When you go to a restaurant and you circle the block 3 times and you're upset because you had to park like a block away from the restaurant.
For free, I'm sure.
And you're just, you cannot believe you didn't get a parking space right in front of the restaurant. That's from Chicago, and you can only imagine.
Right. Before I get to my last 2 questions, is there anything else we should know before we pack our bags and head to Idaho?
Get here soon. As Warren Miller once said, who started his career out here, you'll just be another year older once you decide to come. So get here.
And by the way, the confusion I had earlier is I was thinking of Squaw Valley when I was thinking Olympics. Just figured out what my confusion was.
Everyone said, so you're moving to Utah? No one knows where Idaho is, and the only thing they know about Idaho is potatoes. So are you moving to Iowa or Wyoming? Or it's kind of bizarre. So
last 2 questions, the typical last 2 questions in the show. Finish this sentence for me. You really know you're in Sun Valley, Idaho when what? When
you're walking down the street and everyone's saying hello to you, including Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Okay. And if you had to summarize Sun Valley, Idaho, and the Idaho Rockies there in 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Beautiful, athletic, and nature.
Excellent. And Scott, if people wanted to read more about what you're doing, both your travels and also more about Scottevest, where should they go?
Our website is scottevest.com. That's SCOTTEVEST. And we design the best travel clothing in the world with tons of pockets and innovative features for both men and women.
Excellent. Scott, thanks so much for coming on the show and telling us about your love for Idaho and for Sun Valley in particular.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you, Chris.
In news of the community, I got an email a while back from Gabriel, who was talking about the Travel to Northern Queensland episode 311. Some thoughts on the episode. You talked about saltwater crocodiles, but there are also freshwater crocodiles, and those are harmless, to humans at least. Your guest and you briefly touched on unsealed, unpaved roads. This is very important, I believe, for all non-four-wheel drive rentals. The fine print won't cover you for any damage caused by driving on unsealed roads. And in the Northern Territory, you can't drive when it's dark, or at least couldn't on my rentals. Your mileage may vary. On driving on the other side of the road, there are signs which say, drive on the left in Australia. I found them quite amusing. I have the opposite problem in Europe. It helps if someone is shouting at you if you keep to the wrong side. Failing which, just keep repeating to yourself, keep right, keep right, keep right. Lastly, I was around Darwin last August in parts of the Northwest Territory near the sea. Also have crocodile warnings everywhere, so it's not just Queensland. I found when I drove in Australia that what I really needed to do is when I was making a turn, that was when I needed to be very, very aware of which lane I was turning into. And there's at least one Australian driver who is probably still getting over the trauma of an American coming right at him as I tried to turn into the wrong lane. And then a comment on the episode on San Antonio, Texas. Just listen to the podcast on San Antonio, Texas. Michaela says, great podcast. Some things that were missed around San Antonio. Try, if warm, tubing down the Guadalupe or Cornell rivers and eating German food in New Braunfels, Texas. The German place that I've always gone to for Apfelstrudel is Oma's House. Michaela also sent a link to one of the tubing companies that you can use. Also, Austin, Texas is a close drive to San Antonio. Growing up in East Texas, we had our best time in San Antonio and New Braunfels. Yeah, I suspect we'll probably do an episode sometime in the future on Austin because I think there's probably enough to cover there by itself. But thanks, Michaela, for sharing that. And we also had a comment from Sam on Travel to Umbria, episode 321. Thoroughly enjoyed this podcast. We spent several days in Umbria last year and loved spending time in the piazzas, just drinking coffee and hot chocolate and watching the world go by. People were so friendly and the food was delicious. In the evening, Assisi was at its very best, fewer tourists, making a stroll through the cobblestone streets peaceful and easy. Sam, thank you so much, and thanks to all of those who take the time to comment on the episodes if they enjoy them, and especially all those who take the time to rate the show on iTunes, because that does help people discover the show. With that, we're going to end this episode of The Amateur Traveler so I can get this out and enjoy my 3-day weekend. If you have any questions, feel free to send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com where others can enjoy it. You can also follow me on Twitter at Chris2X, or you can join the conversation on Facebook, facebook.com/amateurtraveler. And as always, thanks so much for listening.